Hello, welcome again. This channel is called Ald Sadu, Ald meaning old, Sadu meaning customs or ways. We discuss the old ways of the Germanic and Scandinavian peoples who venerated the Aesir, such as Odin as one of the Aesir. So today is part one in a long series that I'm doing. I'm going to do many gods and goddesses back to back to back, so hopefully you will enjoy these videos. Today is part one. We're going to cover Odin first. What better place to start than with the one-eyed god Odin? So let's give the basics about Odin. If you did not see last week's video on the Viking religion, the basics, I'm going to explain that the Germanic peoples venerated Odin, not just the Scandinavians. The Scandinavians are Germanic peoples. So the Old Norse name for Odin is Othin. In Old English, it's known as Woden. In Old Saxon, it's Woden. The spelling is a little different in Old Saxon than Old English, which English is the language of the Angles. In Old Dutch, it's Wodan. In Old Frisian, it is Weda. And in Old High German, it is Wotan. Now, possible original name is Ermin. So Ermin is mentioned by Tacitus in the early 2nd century of the Common Era, or 2nd century AD. So this is, Herman was the Latin name. Ermin would be the Old Saxon equivalent. The Old Norse would be Jormunr or Jorman. The Irminsul is certainly named after Ermin. Ermin means strong, so Jorman, the Norse equivalent, would mean strong. So the Irminsul would be the world tree to the Saxons in northern Germany. The Old Norse name would be Yggdrasil. So the Irminsul or Yggdrasil would be the world tree that Odin hung himself on to gain the knowledge of the runes. So Woden and his worship was extensive among the Germanic tribes, and among the English he was the divine ancestor of kings. Like the Norse equivalent Odin, Woden was invoked to give victory in battle. In both the Old High German Merseburg Charm and the Old English 9 Herbs Charm, Woden is depicted as having healing powers. Woden sacrificed his eye. Which eye sacrificed is unclear, but I'm going to come back to that in a later slide because we have some archaeological evidence. But Woden sacrificed one of his eyes at Mim's well to gain the wisdom of all. Mim's well was beneath one of the 3 roots of the Irminsul. Our modern day Wednesday is named after Woden and means Woden's day. However, disclaimer, the Germanic heathens, the Saxon heathens, the Vikings, these peoples, and the Proto-Germanic peoples did not have a 7-day week until Christianization. They had days of the moon waned and it waxed. So our modern words for moon and month are related in the Germanic languages. That includes German, English, and the Scandinavian languages. The word moon and cycle of the moon, meaning month, are related words. So where were the Germanic tribes historically? Well, the Scandinavians certainly are known as Germanic peoples, but Germanic tribes did move westwards and into England. This is where Woden was venerated. Now let's give some more basics of Odin. He is the son of Besla and Bor. His brothers are Vili and Ve. He is the father of Thor, Balder, Sasnoth, and others. He has a long beard and just one eye, because he sacrificed one of his eyes. He has a spear, which is named Gungnir. He has clothes, a cloak, and a broad hat. He's also associated with the color blue. He has 2 wolves, Gary and Freki, and 2 ravens, Hugin and Munin. He has an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir. Half the glorious dead go to Odin's Hall, which is known as Valhalla, which means Hall of the Fallen. The other half go to Frigg's Hall, Folkvanger, which later would be Ode's Hall and Freya's Hall. Odin provides mankind with runic knowledge. Woden takes part both in the creation of the world by slaying the primordial being Ymir, and in giving life to the first two humans, Ask and Embla. Now, Odin has a linguistic relation to Freya's husband, Other. Odin's wife, Frigg, is in many ways similar to Freya. Most scholars believe that Other was born out of Odin, and Freya was born out of Frigg. Dr. Jackson Crawford has a great video on that. I absolutely agree with that video wholeheartedly. And I do believe that Odin and Frigg were known south of Scandinavia, but Other, Freya, as well as Odin and Frigg were known in Scandinavia. The Franks became Christians first, around 500. The Old English followed 150 years or so later. The Old Saxons were forced into the church in the 9th century in northern Germany, and they resisted more in the 9th century. So I guess you can say that forced conversion was ongoing into the 10th. The Scandinavians, though, were still being converted in the 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries, so their heathenry lasted longer and continued to evolve. So I recommend archaeologist Sven Nipschel's great website, Roter Gieser. So you can see his website right here. He has a great blog article. He is a Saxon heathen and a professional archaeologist. He shows where this belt buckle was found, where you can see that Odin had one eye. The interesting history, because this belt buckle is dated to around 600 CE or 600 AD, 600 of the Common Era. This was actually a belt buckle that a Saxon purchased off a Christian Frank. It was a belt buckle of Christ, and the Saxon heathen plucked a bead, because there's one bead in one eye, and he plucked the bead out of the other. I'm not saying that this means that the right eye, I mean, we're looking at it, so it's to our left, that this doesn't mean that Odin's right eye was the one removed, but it is an archaeological clue that at least this one Saxon heathen around 600 felt that Odin's right eye was removed. And this goes to show you that the stories in the prose and poetic Edda that have Woden removing an eye, we have archaeological evidence going back 625 years before Snorri wrote his Edda down, that there was an Odin with one eye. So I find this amazing evidence, and hopefully my audience does as well. We have more archaeological evidence of Odin, such as the Reba skull fragment. I believe Dr. Scott Shell, please visit his channel, has a great YouTube video on this. You can see the runes from that human skull bone, and you can see the poem addressing Ulfr and Odin. So this is dated to 725 of the Common Era. So we've got a plethora of archaeological evidence. I'm just picking some evidence here to share on this video. I'm not going to share all of it, but there is a lot of archaeological evidence for Odin. Now we also have literary evidence. Now the literary evidence isn't always as old. I believe the Old Saxon Halion makes reference to Woden because when Christ is baptized, instead of in the biblical story of a raven hovering above Christ's head, you have a bird landing on the shoulder, which is absolutely a reference to Woden even in around 830. But we have literal archaeological evidence like the second Merseburg Charm from the early 900s, which says Foal and Woden traveled to the forest, then Baldur's foal was sprained, then Sigund and Suna, her sister, spoke a charm, then Freya, now that's Frigg in the Old High German, and Vola, her sister, spoke a charm. Then Woden spoke his best charm. As the bone wrench, so for the blood wrench, so the limb wrench, bone to bone, blood to blood, limb to limb, so be patched. So we have, from the early 900s, we have a charm for Woden for healing. So he certainly is also not just a god of wisdom and a god of war, but he is a god that charms were spoken to for healing. We also have the Old English rune poem from the 11th century. Odin took 9 glory twigs and struck the adder so that it flew into 9 pieces. There archived apple and poison that it never would re-enter the house. So we have more healing charms attributed to Odin. And of course, we have later writings like the Havamal. I know that I hung on a windy tree 9 long nights, wounded with a spear dedicated to Odin, myself to myself, on that tree of which no man knows from where its roots run. No bread did they give me, nor a drink from a horn. Downwards I peered. I took up the runes, screaming I took them, then I fell back from there. So we know that Odin was hung on the Irminsul, or Yggdrasil, the world tree. Now, Tacitus, as early as the 2nd century, because I believe Ermin is a name cognate to the Old Norse Jormund, so I believe that we even have evidence of Odin all the way back to Tacitus' time. Tacitus states specifically around 117 CE, so 2nd century. He's talking of the Germanic peoples, which would include the Scandinavians. He says, in traditional songs, which forms their only record of the past, the Germans celebrate an earthborn god called Twisto. His son Manus, or Human, is supposed to be the fountainhead of the human race, and himself to have begotten 3 sons who gave their names to 3 groups of tribes, the Ingavones, nearest the sea, the Erminones in the interior, and the Istavones, who comprise the west. Now, what's important here is that Manus did have other sons besides the 3, and the sequence in which one god has a son who has 3 famous sons in Tacitus in the 2nd century, it's the same as the Norse creation story recorded 1100 years later, where Buri has a son Boro has 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve. So Tacitus in the 2nd century says Twisto to Manus, to Ing, Ermin, and Iste. This is the beginning of the fully developed Norse Eddaic genealogy of Woden, or Odin, that evolved over time. So Odin was venerated and known for thousands of years. So let me give some literary evidence of the Irminsul. We all know about Uppsala in Sweden, but I'm going to give an Old Saxon twist to this video. The Royal Frankish Annals state in the year 772 AD, or CE of the Common Era, the most gracious Lord King Charles, or Charlemagne, then held an assembly at Worms. From Worms, he marched into Saxony. He captured the hill fort at Merseburg, and he proceeded as far as the Irminsul. He destroyed this idol and carried away the gold and silver he found. A great drought occurred, so that there was no water in the place where the Irminsul stood. The glorious king wished to remain there 2 or 3 days in order to destroy the temple completely, but they had no water. So first, we have an example of the Christians behaving like Vikings long before the Vikings behaved like Vikings. We have the Christians sacking a heathen temple, destroying it, and stealing all the gold and silver. Yes, I'm behaving like a child today, saying the Christians did it first. But in all seriousness, I do believe the Viking Age started because the Christians sacked places like Gunar's Well of the Saxons, Donar's Oak of the Chatti, the Irminsul, and other heathen holy places. They took the gold and silver there, and the Vikings realized they didn't have the cavalry that the Franks had, the Christians who were doing this, but they had the fastest ships. So if they can sack those monasteries before the army got there, and they can get out, an early version of Blitzkrieg, literally, on behalf of Thor, to get in and out. I do believe that there was some Viking reaction to the Christians stealing their gold and silver and destroying their holy sites. So, but what does this have to do, the Irminsul with Yggdrasil? Well, the Irminsul was a holy site to the Saxons, very similar that of Sala, meaning upper hall. Sala means hall. Up means upwards. Sala is where our word saloon or salon comes from. It's a hall. And as the Swedes had a hall where the dead were, where their burial mounds were, the Saxons did as well. It was called the Irminsul. And it was such a big holy site to Ermin or Woden that the glorious King Charles, or Carl or Charlemagne, wished to remain there 2 or 3 days to destroy the temple completely. And he had a full army, and it took him 2 to 3 days to destroy the temple. So that shows you how big that holy site must have been. And of course, the Annals Patuviani state he conquered the Erzberg and found the place, which is called Irminsul, and set these places on fire. So here is a aerial picture of modern Eresburg. The historical Irminsul was here. Naturally, Charlemagne built a church there and put a Christian graveyard there. When he conquered the site in 772 AD, the Saxons retook it in 773 AD. When Charlemagne reconquered it in 775, he said, "To hell with this, I'm building a church here and I'm burying my dead here to say F you to the heathens because I'm going to desecrate it so they can never venerate the heathen gods here again. It will be a place of Christian dead." And you can see how this was a natural hill fort and a natural flat hill with, I mean, what a place to have a holy site and a well-fortified hill fort. So that's where it was historically. I have an Irminsul in my yard today, though today it's portable. I can take it in and out of the house. The rain, even with polyurethane, does a number on wood God pulls in the backyard. So I do have one along with a stone altar. So this was the very basics about Odin, also known as Woden to the old Saxons. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Please visit my website at www.altsudu.com. Please visit the blog there at altsudu.com/blog. And you can join us on Facebook as well in the group Al Sudu Saxon Heathenry. Thank you so much.